My name is Scott Kosiba. I am the executive director of Friends of the Bridger-Teton, and my preferred pronouns are he, him. Personally, it's really gratifying, but professionally and as an organization, it's incredibly complicated. And we were talking in our previous conversation before you started recording about how it's impossible as a biologist or an ecologist to study natural systems without acknowledging the human component. And I think the Bridger-Teton National Forest and really just the greater Yellowstone ecosystem as a whole is just a perfect example of that, where you have, just some of the really some of the most prominent ecological wonders in the world that reside in within this ecosystem. But you also have a really complex dynamic that plays out in those social systems, where whether it's political, whether it's governmental, whether it's I don't know, societal or whatever, but there are just so many different pieces that you have to consider when you're talking about conservation, for example. And that's going to look different. That's going to be different depending on what stakeholder you talk to and where geographically that stakeholder is located too. Provide resources and opportunities for professional development for Forest Service folks. So whether it's leadership, project management, some specific training related to their own job, we'll be doing more of that as well, so that they can be better prepared for their positions. And then within the public, that's a big part of what we do, is try to provide a conduit where the public, whether that's small businesses, individuals, communities, local governments, potentially agencies, other nonprofits, have a way to more effectively interface with the forest by kind of facilitating conversations, removing some administrative and bureaucratic barriers, and then just providing education and opportunities. This summer, we had a bear on Togety Pass, 863. She had 2 cubs. She's a young sow, and when she has cubs, she will spend as much time as possible right on the highway, which is a U.S. interstate with a speed limit of 65, I believe, in the area she most readily frequents. It caused a huge uproar within the community when U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which is the agency in charge of managing threatened and endangered species, decided to haze that bear and her cubs so that they would stop frequenting the road. What happened is we had agencies that were not talking to each other. We had nonprofits that were standing up petitions against some of the agencies. We had members of the public that were publicly excoriating, whatever.
I don't even know that word at all.
They're going after, they were, yelling at, I guess, these agencies and some of the individuals within the agencies, specifically within Fish and Wildlife, Wyoming Game and Fish, and the U.S. Forest Service. Essentially the entire community that's involved in some way or another around grizzly bears in Teton County formed a circular firing squad. What ended up happening, and where we're going to continue to work on this as an organization, is we were able to provide basically serve as an insulator between the federal and state agencies and the public, and the public at large and the nonprofit community, because because of the nature of our relationship with the Forest Service and the closeness of that relationship, there is engendered trust between our two entities. And because of that trust and because of that relationship, that trust was carried over to the Wyoming Game and Fish and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Department. And so we were able to facilitate some conversations that are ongoing right now between these land managers, these wildlife managers, and the public and these nonprofits who, some of which have a very adversarial relationship with these agencies. So some of our more prominent wildlife nonprofits, for example, have active lawsuits against some of these agencies. That's not to say that all of the players in this dynamic wanted to see these bears live, but nonprofit A or member of the public B maybe couldn't be seen in direct collaboration with these agencies, or vice versa, and that's a really important role that we are finding ourselves in more frequently, is because we have that trust within the agencies, but because we are a member of the nonprofit community and the public, we can serve as that insulator where things can get done and things can be done productively without a million cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, because we stay really true to our mission of facilitating and partnership instead of advocacy and litigation. To help that along, that education is really just on the ground outreach. And so that could be, social media. We do a ton of responsible recreation messaging that's geared towards both our locals as well as our visitors, and just creating opportunities for education that are going to resonate with the demographic that you're trying to reach. So my education and outreach is going to look very different for an 80-year-old fifth generation rancher in Sublette County compared to, say, some of the outreach and education efforts we do with say members of the Latinx community in Teton County that maybe don't know what public land is, period, and how the federal government is charged with managing this land and what it means to legally and safely recreate on these lands. So if you don't have that sensitivity and that understanding of your different stakeholders, you're not going to be successful. Those are the people who are most invested in the forest, and therefore are more, I would say, more likely to be willing to contribute in a financial way, or just at least have a seat at the table when we talk about educating users or helping sustain forest operations, stuff like that, especially when it relates specifically to them. So I wouldn't expect a rancher to be gung-ho about buying our ambassadors at Toppings a new patrol vehicle. But if we were going to be replacing and updating and making fences wildlife friendly in the Upper Green where they run their cattle, yeah, that might be something they'd be willing to participate in. We do some engagement, mostly with elementary aged folks, kiddos on the reservation. In normal times, we bring them up. We partner with a bunch of other groups, including the Black Rock Ranger District. They hold a week-long camp called the Black Rock Field Camp for 4th and 5th graders on the Wind River Reservation. I see us as kind of adjacent to that vertical structure. So The Forest Service, I guess I'll start with the Forest Service, it has a very specific top-down chain of command, right? I mean, it's very similar to the military, and that's true probably for most of our state agencies as well. And so if you are within that structure, within that organization tree, you have to respect the chain of command, just like in the military. I exist as the partner to the nonprofit, or as a partner to the Forest Service. I exist outside of that chain of command. And so I have the unique ability to move vertically along that structure in a way that the forest supervisor can't, or the seasonal who's working on the big piney district cannot. And there is a non-system trail that a lot of mountain bikers will use, especially early season. And we were getting reports of groups of mountain bikers spooking deer out onto the melting ice of Fremont Lake, which especially at the very end of the season, as you're approaching that winter closure ending, that's the time when those ungulates are most sensitive. They're the most emaciated. They're potentially in the process of having migrated or in migration. And so to have those deer stressed out and then pushed out onto thin ice is really bad. So what ended up happening, and this is still an ongoing thing, but the conversations I don't think would have maybe happened otherwise, but we were able to bring into the same room a local mountain biking nonprofit, a very new one, a local bike shop owner, and Wyoming Game and Fish into the same room as our wildlife people on the forest. And so now we're starting to have conversations as a, kind of an informal coalition about how can we best protect these animals during this period of time, while also making sure that your recreational needs are potentially met. Like where can we potentially find some compromise there? So it's a complex situation, but I don't see that we would have maybe gotten as far as we've gotten without kind of our ability as an organization to plug some of those members of the public or another agency even. I'd like to help make that information relevant or available, I guess, and facilitate that. It's not uncommon for, say, a researcher to spend 5 years conducting some study, and for the very least, for those results to be communicated to the actual land managers on the ground. But oftentimes, sometimes we don't even know that it's happening, that research was done. And then you hear about it maybe 3 years after the fact, and it's a surprise to them. So kind of helping to connect those dots, I think I'm learning is pretty important, and it's a pretty big gap right now. With respect to Forest Service law enforcement, we try to support them through mostly our ambassador program, where these are volunteers who often are on the forest, patrolling or living somewhat full time, and they are the eyes and ears for law enforcement, and they lead with a carrot, which is education, visitor contact, which is remarkably effective. But if it does raise to the level of needing to engage